Story 1. In my first year of high school, my class decided to play a simple prank on our English SOSE teacher by all laughing when he faced the board and then stopping every time he turned around to face us. After a few minutes of this, he just left the classroom without a word. We all sat there confused until a few minutes later the assistant principal came in and explained that we've really upset our teacher. He made us believe we seriously messed up. Then our teacher walked in and pretty much went, "Gotcha." That son of a bee had our respect from then on. Story 2. I had a principal in a new school I hadn't met yet, because the first day of school at my new high school was my dad's funeral. He had no idea what I looked like, but he sought me out in the really crowded hallways and gave me a hug and his condolences. Never felt creepy, only cared about. He went on to local politics and became our mayor. Only time I have truly voted for the best person for the job, and not the least objectionable. Mr. Perry, if you see this, you earned my instant respect, and you kept it with your further actions. We need more people like you. Story 3. When I was in the first grade, my mother gave me one of many really awful haircuts. The first day back at school after the haircut, the kids picked on me horribly. So much so that I ran out and hid. The principal found me, and we went back to the classroom, and he asked me to wait outside for a minute while he talked to the class. He then walked me to his office and bought me a Coke. The next day, first thing in the morning, we had an assembly with the entire school, and he walked up on stage with his head shaved completely bald and talked about bullying and the like. Some 20 years down the road, he had retired, and I ran into him at the local college. Shook his hand and said, "You probably don't remember me, but—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted, and said my name and the event. The man was and still is a hero in my eyes. Story 4. Math teacher. I don't care if you have good grades or bad grades. If you work hard, I will work harder to make you pass. He worked hard for me. I passed. Story 5. Told us a joke about his name, before we could, and allowed us to eat during his classes because kids your age can't help but be hungry all the time. As long as we did it quietly. Great guy. His whole attitude made all of us actually pay attention and do our best. Story 6. I had a professor that made it crystal clear that if we ever made an appointment and didn't show up, he would take 5 points off of our final grade. I tried to find him during office hours, and he wasn't available. I told him that I deserved an extra 5 points because he wasn't available when he said he would be, and he gave it to me in the interest of fairness. Story 7. I moved out of home during high school. It was stressful to say the least. I started to fall behind in assignments. I would be absent for days at a time. I missed tests, etc. I ended up explaining the bare minimum of my situation to my English teacher, and their response always stuck with me. Just do what you can. It may not seem like much, but right then and there, for a 16-year-old kid who felt like simply living was a burden, it was everything. Story 8. When I was a kid, we had to purchase these red punch cards to get lunch at school. Unfortunately, we didn't have that much money, so there were times where my punch card would run out, and I wasn't able to eat for a while until we got enough money to repurchase another one. Why nobody in my family applied for assistance was beyond me. I had one teacher who noticed I wasn't eating every day, and she would bring an extra sandwich and offer it to me whenever she saw that. I really didn't understand how kind that was when I was a kid, but obviously as an adult, that was such an amazing gesture of kindness. In middle school, I went through something similar. Would just go to my social studies class instead of the cafeteria for lunch because I never had food. Teacher started leaving a few dollars on my desk and would let me get lunch and eat with her. I ate with her most of my 8th grade year, and I would always bring her money that I got, like for B-Day or a holiday, to try to pay her back. She'd just put it in her drawer and give it back to me later. I remember that to this day, and I try to make sure I have change and ones on me at all times for any of my students who need it, as well as keeping my bottom drawer stocked with snacks. My students always know they can count on me for food if they're hungry. Story 9. Junior year of high school, English class. We were discussing a story we had read. One student, let's call him Carl, made a point. The teacher was dismissive and basically said Carl was wrong. The next day, after we took our seats, the teacher said, "Before we begin, I was thinking about what Carl said yesterday. I was wrong to dismiss him so quickly. Let's take a look at that again." He then went on to repeat Carl's point and initiate a conversation with the entire class. After the conversation, it became apparent that Carl's point was indeed off base. But I was impressed the teacher publicly owned his mistake and went down the path he should have. Story 10. I remember my first math class in college. I didn't take any math my senior year of high school because I finished my math requirements my junior year. Anyway, the first math test hit me like a truck after never having to try in high school, and I scored in the low 60s. The next 3 tests, I learned to study and got 3 98s in a row. The last week of class, the professor, who was a hard ass by the way and would kick you out for having your phone out, called me up to her desk after class and said clearly, "You were having a bad day on that first exam, so don't worry about that grade because I won't count it." It really changed my view of that professor. Story 11. Instead of shouting at my loud class for not shutting up before the lesson began, my history teacher decided to quietly tell the story of a pink elephant that wanted to be an astronaut. After a few seconds, people started to shut up and listen about the pink elephant. When everyone was quiet and listening, he stopped mid-story. As much as it made me respect him, why didn't you finish the story? That cliffhanger! Story 12. Not take my crap. I was a pretty decent writer in school, able to pop stuff out pretty quickly that was superficial but sounded good. The first time I had a teacher hand my work back, pointing out that I managed to compellingly fail to say anything, was sort of a slap in the face that I didn't realize I needed. My first paper in grad school, the professor did the same to me. I had gotten all the way through a bachelor's degree on my writing ability. My senior year, last semester, I cranked out 9 20-page assignments. Then I went to grad school, and my first paper was supposed to be a 7-page historiography. Basically, an analysis of how historians have interpreted the subject over time, of a specific historical icon. Turned in my paper assuming I would do well, and then the professor wrote on my paper, F, call me, we need to chat. He said I didn't really know how to find, interpret, and analyze source material, primary or secondary. The next several papers I wrote, I worked really closely with him, and he's the one who taught me how to adequately research and make insightful, thoughtful commentary on my sources. Ended up with an A- in the class, and his teaching really stuck with me. Story 13. A supply teacher spent the day recovering my lost sticker collection. I'm sure it's done in other countries, but in UK primary and junior schools, playtime becomes a trading hub on the playground for stickers. Anyway, one particular day I made a massive haul of stickers, which I misplaced for a split second and it was gone. I was devastated, and my teacher saw me in distress when I got back from class. My teacher promised she would get them all back for me. True to her word, she did. In fact, it turned out several people had made off with my stash of stickers, and she spent her lunchtime tracking down every one of the children who had them, claiming them back and grilling the kids in turn to who else had my cards and getting them to see her. By the end of lunch, she returned them to me all accounted for. For a supply teacher to do this, it was a seriously kind gesture, as most teachers would shrug their shoulders and carry on as if nothing happened. A lot of people are asking me what a supply teacher is. It's just another way of saying a temp replacement teacher when the normal teacher is ill or can't teach on that day. She was an absolute legend. We had her for a few weeks, and she made learning damn fun. First, she came up with a picture of an image. In our case, it was Robin Hood, and each limb or part of the body had a reward on it. Small stuff, like 10 minutes of playtime, for example. Bigger parts meant bigger rewards. As the students did well, good marks, good behavior, etc., they got stickers, and you stuck it on the picture. It was a class effort, as you all worked towards the prizes. And for our young minds, this was amazing, as we never had that kind of incentive. Second, there was a student of the day, the MVP of the class, and she would announce it at the end of the day in front of the class, so that you knew that you were the MVP, and everyone else knew it and how you earned it. She even had a dedicated corner of the chalkboard for your name. Again, as a kid, it just blew your mind. And you got perks, like getting to sit on the chairs instead of the floor, and of course, stickers. Yeah, I cried when I saw her go. When she got those stickers back, I was absolutely compelled that night to write her a thank you message, and get my parents to sign it. Story 14. We had an exam saying, I'll test your honesty and your teamwork. I'm gonna leave the room once your exam starts. So we thought it's between honesty that we don't share answers with each other, and teamwork by cheating. We were so desperate and cheated on the exams. Professor came back 5 minutes before the time was up and asked, "So did you share your answers with one another?" And we all said yes. "Okay," he said. "Since you are all honest and you proved to me that you had your teamwork as a class, I will exempt all of you for this exam." Story 15. I had been put in a lower set due to class capacity issues. He started off with a speech around what we would be learning this year, and then assigned work to the class. After that, he walked up to me and gave me a big book with a syllabus, and told me he knew I'm too smart for this class. And instead of following what the class does, he wants me to work through the syllabus at my pace, faster than others being implied. And he would come back and check on me after assigning work to everyone else. He said I could do lots or a little each class, but I needed to finish the book by the end of the year. Super duper motivated me to smash his class. Story 16. I went to a small charter school for middle school. Our English lit teacher was brand new to teaching. If I remember correctly, she was only 22, which seemed old at the time. She always did her best to be so cheerful and make learning fun. But the thing that truly solidified her spot as my favorite teacher was that for every student's birthday, she would give you a personalized mini notebook. It was just a simple, small composition notebook, but she had filled the first couple pages, telling me how much she loved having me as a student, how far she knew I would go, and other affirmations. It seems small, but as a 13-year-old who had a crappy home life, it made all the difference in how I acted the rest of the year. Story 17. We had a pretty cool and badass teacher in 5th grade. He was cool, made jokes, made lessons fun, but at the same time, he did not take any crap. We had these really naughty boys in our class. Like they pulled pranks, skipped class, bullied other kids, never turned in assignments or projects, etc. One day, they did something really bad. Don't remember what it was, and it made our teacher really, really mad. I was like, this is it. We are all about to be a bunch of witnesses. I genuinely thought he was about to put hands on these kids. This man was livid. He called the main instigator to the front of the class and just stared at him for what seemed like forever. And this kid was just like, not bothered, had an attitude. This teacher then starts talking, cool and calm, lecturing this kid about all the bad choices he's making, about how he needs to think about if those choices are going to get him anywhere in life, stuff like that. He brought that kid to tears. This kid, who thought he was the crap, oh so cool, untouchable, will never have to face the music kind of kid. He stood there in tears. The teacher wasn't rude or disrespectful, didn't like to hit the kid or scream and shout at the kid, simply spoke to him about making better choices. Teacher said the lecture was a lesson to all of us. I just think it was so cool the way the teacher handled it. It spoke to him and all of us in a way that made us think about our future for the first time. Make good choices. Story 18. My speech class teacher in my senior year of high school knew that I was a budding free speech anti-censorship type guy. So for our debate project, she put me on the pro-censorship team. I was pissed, but when I asked her about it, she gave me a line about how the teams were already set and she wasn't going to change them. Over the next few days, I found out that 2 of the people who were on the anti-censorship side were actually in favor of it. And a few people on the other teams were likewise put on the sides that didn't match their own views. Even at the time, I saw what she was doing, but every time I think about it, I see just how brilliant she was at teaching us how to look at the merits of all sides of an argument, as well as how well she knew the attitudes and ideals of at least 60-odd students that took her classes. Story 19. He admitted that he didn't particularly want to be a teacher, but did it for a stable career. The type of guy who should have been an English PhD, but didn't have the money to chase an academic career like that. He was way too good to be teaching high school English. Story 20. It was a professor, but she said she wasn't going to have a textbook for the class. Basically, she did not respect the textbook representatives trying to take the pharma approach to force kids to buy a $170 access code. Instant respect. You just had to show up to the lectures and she would teach you what you needed to know. Story 21. I had a teacher in the 6th grade who gave me a C+ on a poster project that I turned in. When he saw my disappointment, he asked, "What grade do you think you should have gotten?" I thought for a second and said, "A B+?" He immediately scratched out the grade and gave me a B+. Tragically, I saw in the news a few years later that he drowned while on a fishing trip. That got to me. Story 22. I had an English teacher who would give me oranges in class, because if I'm eating, then I can't be talking. I was also in love with her, and probably still am, but that's besides the point. I was in love with her because of the way she used to bring stories to life. I used to sit there dreamily with my clementine and fall into her soft voice. She used to give me oranges, mainly because I'm a bit and sitting still just doesn't happen for me. It wasn't every lesson, but she noticed the correlation between no orange versus orange lessons. Story 23. I had a teacher that really understood different types of learning. I was awful at testing and never did well in school, but I was very intelligent. He pulled me aside one day and said, "Look, I know you're not an idiot, but you're just not good at the school thing. I know you're good with your hands. If you can fix my rocking chair, I'll pass you." So I went into my wood shop and fixed his rocking chair. He really had the respect of every student, and he knew how to talk to us as equals and not children. He's literally touched the lives of tens of thousands of people with crap like that. Story 24. Treated kids with autism plus Asperger's like actual human beings. In my school, I was in a special needs unit for kids with Asperger's and autism called the CDU, Communication Disorder Unit. The kids in there ranged from having mild Asperger's to full-on severe autism. And as such, most teachers treated everyone from there like they had severe mental health problems, just because they were labeled as having autism or Asperger's, even if it was very mild. But there was one support teacher in the CDU who was genuinely just a nice dude. Whether he was talking to kids who had severe autism or just some mild social anxiety, he wouldn't talk extra slowly or call you bud or pal at the end of a sentence. He would talk to everyone like they were real human beings. It might seem like a small thing, but when that's how pretty much all teachers talked to you and treated you in every class, it was very refreshing to talk to someone who would talk to you based on who you were as a person, rather than treating someone differently for being labeled as autistic. Story 25. I had a teacher in elementary school who was prone to outbursts. He had a short fuse, at least compared to every other adult I knew at the time. For instance, when several of us in class weren't listening, he'd throw a piece of chalk against the wall to get our attention. Honestly, we just thought he was crazy. A year or two later, the school had a talent show. Like a big one, in the gym, in front of everyone. One of my classmates was really into music and wanted to play a drum solo. Our teacher had mentioned offhand that he used to be in a band and played drums. So my classmate asked him, sort of dared, like kids often do with adults, to play a solo in front of the school. And he did. He rocked it. But that's not what made me respect him. Turns out the band he played for was very successful, and at the time, quite a popular rock band. He just left before they became popular, because he wanted to be a teacher. He chose teaching kids over the chance at fame and fortune, and didn't regret it. Story 1. In 5th grade, I had this teacher who was very gruff. Most of us didn't like her because she was such a hard ass. Like military style, with discipline and homework completion. She wasn't mean, but she wasn't nice either. Then I found out my parents were getting a divorce. I showed up to school one day visibly upset, kinda shaky, and had obviously been crying. She basically grunt-rasped, decidedly undecided. Hallway, now. I was so not in the mood to be scolded, and I knew I was a mess. I stomped out into the hallway, and she told me she knew what was going on at home, and asked me if I was okay, then listened to me sob and break down about how I felt. She gave me a hug, and asked if I wanted to spend an hour or so in the library since she knew I loved books, and then I could ground myself. It was so unexpectedly kind. I will never forget it. I found out later she was so gruff and short with us because she's been teaching for a long time, and kids are just mean. She had some sort of health condition that left her in pain most of the time, and she had to use a cane, which caused her to hunch a bit. Over the years, all the meanness of the kids made her a little hard and cold, but she really did care about her students. Story 2. In high school, one of my teachers had this duckbill whistle, literally shaped like a duck's bill, and it made a quacking noise. She used it to get the class's attention. One time, I guess we were being extra rowdy, and she blew the ever-loving crap out of it, and the class went stone-dead quiet. She got this shocked look on her face, and then took her hairpin out and dropped it, and the whole class heard it hit the ground, and she got this big grin on her face. And we all just busted out laughing. Story 3. I faked my way through 4th and 5th grade math. I never understood how to do long division, but managed to hide that from the teachers and answer test questions by reverse multiplication. Basically, guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. My 6th grade math teacher figured out that I was faking, and that I had no idea how to actually divide anything. She had me come in one afternoon to help with cleaning the erasers. All the kids fought for this privilege, so I was thrilled. Sat me down and tutored me until I understood the concept. Bless you, Mrs. Gillespie. Story 4. At my high school, we had an annual week-long science trip, fully paid for by fundraising. Only 4 people were selected to go each year. My sophomore year, I was chosen. I knew there was no way I was going to be allowed to go. I had never been out of the state, never been on a single vacation, never been on a plane, and never been away from home for more than 24 hours. My parents were incredibly conservative and immediately said no. I had a science teacher who didn't accept the no. Instead of just giving up and selecting someone else, he called and tried to convince my parents. When that didn't work, he came to my house and had dinner with my family to convince my dad that I would be an asset and he would be doing me a disservice by not letting me go. He sat at our table and ate my mom's terrible cooking and talked to my parents for over 2 hours until he got a "we'll think about it." Then he just kept following up. I had never had someone in my corner like that before, who was willing to go to bat for me like that. He wore them down, and it was the best week of my teenage life. I'd never seen the ocean. 20 years later, and I can still recall every detail of that trip. It was a major pivot point for me. Story 5. My physics teacher in high school hosted an annual trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando for 15 to 20 kids for over a week. I was one of the better and most interested students in his class. He was an incredible teacher who found examples in physics everywhere. He also used to work for Disney prior to teaching. Since my family was not so well off and I couldn't afford the trip to Walt Disney World, I declined when he asked me if I was going to join. He probed a bit and somehow found the funds to have me join without me even inquiring. I don't know if he pulled the school money or if there was a surplus, but either way, that was one of the best memories from that school, and I still keep in touch with him 15 years later. Story 6. She outed me for pretending to not speak English to my mom. I am Mexican American, but I am one of those lame border-crossed-me ones who was really a Native American, if we're being honest. At any rate, I ignored my kindergarten teacher so much that she assumed I didn't speak English. I had skipped state testing because I had been to 6 to 7 elementary schools as my mom was skipping out on rent. Middle of 1st grade, a random teacher realizes I'm reading library books brought from home in the back and not doing my work. Not common in a special ed classroom. She called my mom and teacher to a meeting, had me tested as gifted, told my mom that I was pretending to not understand my teachers, and told us that in 2nd grade I was going to be in her room. I was in trouble. For the first and last time in school. Looking back, this is such an impactful memory. She was the only teacher who cared about me at all. When they opened my backpack at the meeting, I had it packed with random books. I had encyclopedias from my grandparents' house, stuff from 3 school libraries, magazines, etc. Mrs. Judah changed my life because she cared enough to ask the librarian what language I spoke to help me pick more age-appropriate books. I was reading a high school level novel because the school had just been converted from K to 12. It turns out high school books were appropriate for me. Not age appropriate, but reading level. I love her and will never forget the stash of books she kept for me when they converted the library for K to 5. Story 7. The professor I had for my Calculus 100 class in university was awesome. He was a good teacher and funny and engaging. It was a first-year class with over 100 people in it. I was just a face in a big crowd. I was on campus after hours a couple years after I graduated. They run programs for kids in the evenings and were dropping off my oldest. And I saw him. He stopped, looked at me hard, and said my first and last name, and then said, "Not a bad student. Not great, but definitely not bad," and kept walking. This was a good 6 years after I graduated. Absolutely amazed he would have remembered me at all after teaching how many hundreds of students in between. That is just crazy. I had the opposite with my high school band director. When I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hall with two of my friends who were also in band. At this point, I had been in band with this teacher for almost 4 years, saw him every day, and had one-on-one auditions and regular individual performance exams with him. He saw us walking by and greeted us. Hey, John. Hey, Jennifer. Hey. Drawing a complete blank on my name. I didn't take it too personally because he was really nice, but he was one of those people who was really focused on the music, to the exclusion of everything else, and was kind of flaky. I would not be surprised if he identified us all in his head by our instruments and the sound of our playing first, and faces and names a distant second. Story 8. Told me I was smart and could succeed. I had spent the past couple of years at a private school, trying so hard to prove myself. Despite doing well academically, I didn't quite fit their cookie-cutter mold, so I was looked down on by other students and administration. When I told the guidance counselor that I wanted to be pre-med and go to medical school after college, she pretty much told me to lower my expectations because I would not succeed. At the end of my college math class my senior year of high school, I ended up in my professor's office to look at what I had missed on my final. He told me that I had done well and that I could get my PhD in math if I wanted. That was not what I wanted to do, but when I told him I wanted to be pre-med, he looked at me and said, "You're going to do well in that. I know you'll succeed." 6 years later, and I'm halfway through my second year of medical school, and his words still ring in my mind. Story 9. Had the police come to the school because he had reason to believe I was smoking cigarettes and using drugs in 7th grade. No, both of my parents smoked in the house. I didn't even know I smelled like cigarettes until the police told me why they were searching my backpack, desk, and locker. Story 10. When I was in 7th grade, there was a teacher at my school that was essentially a love child of Santa and an elf. Dude was 5'2", over 300 pounds, and had a beard that would put Gimli to shame. My first ever conversation with this man ended with him saying, "Now you go get yourself something to eat, big man." It caught me so off guard, I didn't even realize what he had said until after I walked away. Story 11. My RE teacher tried to keep me behind for no reason. I'm a complete goody two-shoes, and he gave me my first ever detention for asking my friend about what textbook page we were reading after coming to class late following an appointment. The guy tried to make me pick bits of paper and rubber bands off the floor as he watched me do it. I walked out, with zero consequences. Story 12. Not me, but my brother. He had one of those haircuts that was popular in the mid-90s, where you have a long fringe, maybe 5 inches, but skinhead the rest. He was a skateboarder. Anyway, the woodshop teacher decided that the haircut was a health and safety hazard, and swiftly cut his hair in front of the entire class while berating him and giving him a lecture on kids today, etc., etc. My brother was 12 and came home from school crying. My father was less than pleased and apparently went up to the school and made a right kerfuffle, as he should. My mother was very embarrassed by it all. I'll never forget. Story 13. When I was in 3rd grade, the teacher of my gifted program class, extra class we were pulled from mainstream to do a few hours a week, started berating me over raising my hand too quickly to answer questions, saying I needed to think longer and give others the chance to answer. She went on and on about how I had an attitude. I got upset, and she made me stand in front of the class when I started to cry. I know you're crying, and I don't care. It was my birthday, too. It was a class of about 8 students. One guy told me in high school that day was one of his clearest memories from elementary school. One of my most vivid memories of high school is an old English teacher mocking a fellow student's nervous stammer as she did her presentation in front of the class. When the student started crying, that teacher mocked her crying, then failed her for not completing the presentation because she was crying. We used to joke that we hoped that an old dried-up piece of crap like her would drop dead in front of the class. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I hope your subsequent birthdays have rocked. Story 14. Oh boy. Grade 3, I said, "Aw, crap," when I got tagged out, rounding second during a game of soccer baseball. Canadian term for kickball. A little girl covering the base screamed, "Teacher, negotiation fair said the C word." So I got put in detention and yelled at for the rest of the day until I finally snapped on my teacher at the end of the day and said, "Listen, teacher, I don't get it at all. All I said was aw crap when she caught the ball, and I didn't even know that that was a swear word." The teacher replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said the other C word." I said, "What is the other C word?" She said, "Ask your mother." At the end of the day, I got into the van and told my mom what happened. She broke out laughing her ass off and explained to me when I asked that the word the teacher thought I had said was. I went to school the next day and said it to all my friends. Hey, guys, guess what word I just learned? Story 15. Senior year of high school. I was on the wrestling team, and I had cut about 30 pounds that year, from 170 down to 140. I happened to have the same math teacher 3 years in a row, so we really got to know each other. First name basis and all that. She knew how much weight I cut for the season. I told her, and it was obvious just from my face. I wasn't fat before my cut either. I had a six-pack. She had a strict no eating in class policy. That'll be important in a minute. The day after the wrestling season ends, I walk into math class and sit down. She walks over to my desk and puts a whole apple pie right in front of me. She knew it was my favorite, handed me a fork, and she said she'll ignore the no eating rule for one day. I finished that whole pie in maybe 30 minutes. Linda, I will never forget that. You absolutely made my day. Story 16. I have always loved learning and loved going to school. I was a good kid and never really got into trouble. One year, my parents got called in for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, each of my teachers told my parents that I acted out during class, was a distraction, etc. This came as a surprise to my parents, as I had never gotten in trouble, and my grades were always good. Finally, the conversation got to my history teacher and my science teacher. They were speechless. My history teacher told my parents that he wished he had a classroom full of students with a passion for learning like me, and that if the other teachers put in as much effort into teaching as I did into learning, then there would not be an issue. My science teacher agreed and apologized for wasting my parents' time. The rest of the school year was interesting. I could tell there was tension between certain groups of my teachers. My history teacher would later become the principal of that school, and I could not think of anyone more deserving of that role. Story 17. Freshman English teacher in college. He had a last name with 2 capital letters in it, so something like McConnor. On the top of one of my first papers, I wrote McConnor with 2 lowercase c's, and he told me that I spelt his name incorrectly. Now, obviously, this confused me because the spelling was indeed correct, and it took a few minutes of back and forth confusion before he told me what I did wrong. Like a typical 18-year-old, I just kind of shrugged it off, like, who cares? His response was essentially, if you don't care enough about your writing to get it correct, why the hell should somebody else care enough to read it? The response hit pretty close to home. Not initially, of course, because I was an 18-year-old, but now, 15 years later, I still think about it from time to time, and it does force me to put more of an effort into many of the things that I do. Story 18. My computer science teacher would belittle me in front of the other students and even asked me why I showed up for class. I hated his class and slowly just stopped doing the work and failed the class because he made me believe I was dumb and incapable. I'm currently working in an MSCS at a top 10 CS school and have plans to apply for PhD programs in CS next year. Story 19. 5th grade. Teacher was shaking with anger because I put my math problems horizontally instead of vertically, or something really stupid like that. She snapped at me for not being able to follow simple directions and humiliated me. When she went to look at the paper of the boy next to me, he said, "I did it the same way." She smiled fondly and said, "Oh, Robert," as if she was amused. Story 20. I once got expelled for smoking at school when at the time I never even smoked it. I was 13 and started crying, saying that I didn't smoke any. Since I was crying, my eyes got red, and then the teacher and principal said, "Just look at how red your eyes are. You're ripped out of your mind." It got me kicked off our championship basketball team and everything. I will never forgive those two for what they did to me and the stress they caused my single mother. Story 21 wasn't so much what she did to or for me as something she did with the entire class. 8th grade language arts class. She was a very cool person. Never looked at you with judgmental eyes, treated everyone the same and with respect and honesty, like we were equals to her. Anyways, the one thing that sticks out more than any other was the very first day of school. She made us all listen to a song. Didn't tell us why. Seemed kind of pointless and lame at the time. Last day of school, we played the same song. Can't even describe how I felt. The school years always seemed to drag on and on. Could never wait for summer. But when she played the song at the end of the year, it kind of brought the whole year together and made it seem like you had just walked in the door for the first time. For the life of me, I wish I could remember what that song was. Story 22. Had a teacher in first grade who was hella superstitious and stuff. One time, she told us if we slept with our feet out from under the blankets, someone would break into our house, cut off our feet, and then leave them on our front porch inside our shoes. It wasn't even near Halloween or anything. She was just saying it like it was actual advice. Scared the crap out of little kid me. Story 23. Guy sitting beside me had his head resting on his stacked fists on the desk, wide awake and paying attention. Teacher was walking up and down aisles, came up behind him and smacked him across the back of the head with the spine of a rather large business studies book while screeching, "Pay attention." I will never forget the hollow thud sound. Poor effer was dazed for hours after. Story 24. My 6th grade teacher made us act out some Greek gods and helpers since we were doing mythology. A girl in my class decided to act out as Hermes. After she was done acting out as the character, the teacher looked her dead in the eye and said, "That was gay. Why didn't you act out as a Greek goddess?" The girl left the class crying.